one generation to the next. Purity is with you every step of the way, yes, from that very first introduction to solids and beyond. I'm thrilled to be joined by the beautiful parenting blogger and mom, Ayanda Rathete. Ayanda, thank you so much for joining us once again. It's so good to have you.
So good to be here. Thank you so much.
Ayanda, let's kick off straight away with a product that every household in South Africa knows, the Purity jars. They're so convenient. How have the jars been just a great meal for you and your children? How have they helped you and your little ones?
These have actually helped me in the most amazing way, simply because sometimes when I don't have the time to make my child food, then these are always my go-to. I always have these in my cupboard, and this, of course, this little baby over here is my ultimate. I also do love the fact that they come in different sizes, and that actually lets me know on how much to feed my child, because I struggle with that most of the time. I never know if I'm overfeeding him or not.
I agree with you, Ayanda, and what I love about the meals in the jars is that they are free from all preservatives, colorants and flavorants. But now let's talk those Purity pouches, these go-to snacks. Tell us more about how that's helped you and your little ones.
These are definitely my go-to snack. I love the fact that my son can actually suck it through the tube, which is actually a great introduction to drinking from a straw. And I also love just how spontaneous the flavors are. I love the fact that I can introduce him to the one that's got the chicken and the apricot. I completely just love the fact that they're very easy. Put them in the bag, and whenever you're out anywhere, you just pop them out and your child can just suck through it.
Ayanda, I have to admit, talking about all these divine flavors in the pouches, I am an absolute berry girl. I love my berries. And while we're talking about flavor, I know that these pouches may be great snacks and fillers, but at the same time, people have used them to enhance recipe flavors even. Do you have one or two hacks for parents?
I do. I love how you mentioned the berry flavors. Although there are so many, there's a whole variety between the fruit, the yogurt, and the vegetable. Absolutely. I do absolutely love the fruit ones. They're so easy to use. I love to pop the berry one in the freezer and make little popsicles for my daughter and my son.
Such a great idea. Guilt-free ice cream, am I right?
Yes, no, definitely. But yeah, I just love the fact that there's just a variety. You can make popsicles, you can pop them into batter when you're making little scones for your kids.
What a good idea.
Yeah, and you can even do little flapjacks.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I just love the fact that you can use them in so many different ways.
Convenient and versatile at the same time. And then lastly, you've been chatting to your community. Are there a couple of questions from the parents that have come through concerning introducing your little ones to solids?
So there were questions that did stand out for me. One of the questions was when to introduce high allergy foods. The other one was what does it mean when your child is spitting up food? Does it mean that your child is not ready for solids, or what does it mean?
Well, those are great questions that have come through from your community, Ayanda, and guiding them on their journey to solids is the Purity Panel expert, registered dietitian, a face and voice we know well, Kath Megaw. So I'm going to zoom on over to her and find out how she can give us more insights and help the community along. Kath Megaw is a paediatric dietitian with more than 20 years experience. She's also a mom to 3 beautiful children and is the co-author of the popular book, Weaning Sense, A Guide to Solids. Kath, welcome. It's always so great to be in conversation with you and get your insight and guidance. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here again.
And as we kick off, Kath, when we talk about the ABCs of weaning, please unpack that for us. What do you mean by that?
So I think really what we're looking at, the fundamentals, is when do we wean? When is the best age? What sort of foods do we start with? And how do we know that our baby is ready, even if the age looks ready? And those are really critical things to consider. And then one extra thing that I like to add is the mom ready? Because I remember there were times when I wasn't ready to wean one of my children because I knew the implications of what that entailed, going from an exclusively seemingly easy milk diet, now adding food into the diet. So as exciting as it is, it can also be quite daunting and overwhelming. So those are really important factors to consider.
I love that. I love that you're asking if mom's ready as well. And just to wrap it all up, does ABC stand for anything in particular?
No, not really. It's just really saying, are we ready to get going? You start in like your alphabet, or you start in this process of weaning.
Okay, I understand. Now, Kath, the next question that one of the moms in Ayanda's community asked was, my baby's spitting out food. What does that mean? Is she ready to be moving on to solids? And if she's spitting out, and what does that mean for her?
So often moms see the tongue thrust as spitting, but actually it's just the tongue that moves out, because when you breastfeed or even when you bottle feed, the baby's tongue actually has to go around the nipple, the teat. So the baby's tongue actually protrudes out. So when they start feeding solids, they do the same thing. The only thing is it's not very conducive to swallowing. So they have to get rid of this reflex and get rid of it. I mean, it's just a developmental thing. And as you start the solids, so they retract their tongue and they learn to actually pull their tongue back for solids as opposed to pushing it out for liquid feeding. So it's just a developmental milestone. So it's not an indication that they're not ready for solids. It's not an indication that they don't like the taste of the solid. Often parents will say, oh, he didn't like the taste because he spat it out, but it actually had nothing to do with that. It was just a reflex action.
Oh, I love that. I didn't realize that it was muscular and not because baby actually doesn't like the food. Another question that's come through from Ayanda's community is, how do they know, Kath? Because it can be quite intimidating. Which foods do I move on to and when, in terms of texture and variety? Can you talk to us about that?
So I think we need to remember that solids are very different to liquid. So milk is smooth, it's white, it's the same taste day in, day out. Solids, even the smoothest solids, will have a different texture. It will have a totally different taste. It will have a totally different look to it as well. So there's a lot for the baby to get used to. So you have to really identify your baby. Some babies are very adventurous, normally the very outgoing babies, the babies that don't mind going between kind of the breast and the bottle and didn't really have a problem latching. But then you get your baby who's a little bit more reserved, takes a little bit more time to warm up to people. So those babies might take a little bit longer to move from one texture onto the next texture. But it doesn't mean that you need to not challenge those babies. So just like a very outgoing, vivacious, engaging baby that wants to try everything and anything, so your baby that's a bit slow and a bit more sensitive also needs to be encouraged to move on to texture. So in the beginning, if your baby is a little bit slower to kind of engage with the food, you might want to start with like a cereal that you can mix with a bit of milk. If your baby's a bit more adventurous, you might find that they enjoy the veggies. I love starting with seasonal fruits and veggies that are available and that can be included in a puree form, so a very smooth form initially, and then moving on to the next stage, which will be a little bit more textured as they learn to engage with this. But every baby's journey moving through the textures will be different, but it is important to slowly advance them.
And just to touch on that again, in terms of age appropriateness and knowing which foods to introduce when, do you have any advice for the parents?
Yeah, so in the beginning, you might start with either your simple single grain cereals. You will start with a simple fruit or vegetable, and then you can start to combine the fruits and vegetables. You can be quite adventurous with them because babies do love to start engaging with the different flavors. It's important to introduce the protein foods fairly early on in the weaning journey, and these will include your eggs, include your fish, include your nuts, so in the form of nut butter, obviously, because it's dangerous to give them whole nuts. And those are very important that you introduce them so that the baby's body starts to build some tolerance to those foods. Otherwise, they could become very sensitive if they're introduced too late. So at the beginning of the weaning journey, once they're onto a single grain cereal, possibly some fruits, some vegetable purees, then you can slowly introduce them to some of your protein or your more higher risk foods, and those that you would do systematically. And from definitely from 6 months on, those protein foods can be starting to be introduced.
We've already come to the last question that we have for you, can you believe it? But just once again, in terms of variety, in your professional opinion, how important is that variety for baby when you introduce them to solids? Because I know, I was very cautious with my first daughter and a bit more adventurous with my second one. And I think often that caution rests with us as parents. So how important is variety?
Yes, I think you're so right. It's often us that hold back, and they kind of rely on us. And really, variety is so important because you've got such a wonderful window period, up to a year, to really introduce them to a variety of solids. And introduction doesn't mean them eating a whole bowl of broccoli or eating a whole bowl of chicken. It really means just being exposed to many different flavors and textures and colors. And so variety can be introduced through the pureed food. It can be introduced through handheld food that you are, for example, cooking for your supper tonight. You can hold off a few blocks of butternut so that the baby can actually get the experience of the food through touch, sight. It's so important that you allow your baby to engage with food on all their senses, not just the taste. That will make them accept the spoon foods and purees a bit easier.
Well, Kath, after that, I know that the parents who are listening intently to this conversation have got a lot more confidence when it comes to introducing their babies to solids. So thank you so much once again on behalf of Parent Talk for joining us and bringing your expertise to the table.
Thank you so much for having me.
Purity understands just how important it is for growing little ones to have different flavors and textures in their diet. With such a large variety across their range, every Purity pouch and jar has been created with your little one's development in mind. Adding more excitement to this lifelong journey, Purity developed the free Purity app. While you experience the many emotions and thoughts that go hand in hand with being a parent, the Purity Journey Journal app is uniquely South African, with 24/7 access to medical doctors, experts to answer your burning questions, pregnancy and food tracking. You know what? Take a look for yourself and register now. Keep an eye out for our next Parent Talk insert as Purity walks this journey with you.